Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Mistwalkers, where we discuss Dungeons & Dragons as a storytelling medium through the lens of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons module Curse of Strahd. My name is Chris, I'm a Dungeon Master and Communications student, and I'm joined by my co-host and 3rd level monk, Josh. How you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing good. I'm getting used to that sorcerer to monk transition. Still feels a little bit funny, but I'm enjoying it so far.
That's good. I'm glad you're getting the feel for it. It's a very different type of class. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to make a couple of disclaimers. This will contain spoilers for the 5th edition module Curse of Strahd. If you are a player in a Curse of Strahd campaign, we just ask that you please respect your DM and ask their permission before listening to the podcast. I have a lot of exciting things planned for my players. I wouldn't want them spoiled on any of it, and I'm sure your DM wouldn't want what they have planned for you to be spoiled as well.
Do it for yourself. Like it's just more fun if you don't know what's happening. Don't do it for both the team, your DM, for your own sake, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. And secondly, while this does use the Curse of Strahd module, there is a fair number of changes and homebrew additions that I have made to the content in the book. Some of these changes I took from online resources such as Sly Flourish, Dragna Carta, and Lunchbreak Heroes, among others, and some of the changes were of my own creation. So, if you're a by-the-book type person or like, hey, I don't remember this from the module, well, that's why. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. First, I just do want to ask you, Josh, you said you're getting used to your new character a little bit, but did you feel just from a characterization standpoint, a role-playing standpoint, just what changes did you feel were necessary in how you play the character, transitioning from a pure caster like a sorcerer to Alis, a monk who monks are completely different. They don't have any spells. They've got a completely different skill set. I know obviously Alis is a different character for me, just so of course he's got different personality traits, different background, different history. But did you feel that just the change of class, what decisions did that lead you to in terms of how you wanted to characterize Alis?
In terms of characterizing Alice, I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot from just kind of thinking from the class to itself. I kind of thought in terms of just from the character design perspective was, when I'm creating a new character, like I knew I wanted to make a monk for the subsequent character following up after Aegis, and then trying to work backwards. How does someone go from wherever they were in life, from effectively being born to becoming a monk? Because the sorcerer background, of course, the idea is that is your magic is innate. Becoming a monk isn't something that is in your blood, literally. I mean, maybe you could do a homebrew about a character background, a character bloodline, where that's something that happens, but even then, it's usually a hereditary title. So it was kind of fun trying to imagine the character premise. And I mean, ultimately, we both collaborated using Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft of that kind of supplemental book that kind of explains the Ravenloft campaign setting, and then moving a monk into that. So I enjoyed really, creating the character sheet, making a character that I thought would have been most useful for this team, and then making story decisions in reverse. So, okay, I know he's good at dexterity. That feels really great. Obviously, he's a monk. And he's also in the carnival, which is this sort of literal traveling carnival that would go to the different islands that the Domains of Dread or the Ravenloft campaign setting had. And thinking about how does he make himself? I look at the fact that he's got good charisma. I imagine he could easily have been an acrobat and do performances if he's in the carnival. The fact that he has garbage charisma, though, I then tried to imagine, why is he like that? Perhaps he's very shy. Indeed, maybe he doesn't want to be. And that's generally how I was able to I thought of the differences that would be between my sorcerer, who was very charismatic and very outgoing, and then do you try to contrast that then of this low charisma person is much more soft spoken, much less comfortable in the limelight. That's the basic idea.
Yeah, so I think is really interesting. There's a lot of different ways that you can make characters in D&D. There's kind of the uh, I asked you about did you put this together from the basics of the class, and you kind of said no, but you did consider how he reached this point in his life. And one thing, and I do believe we mentioned it a little bit at the end of episode 1, Alis is from the domains of Dread, which the rest of the party are not. The rest of the party are from Forgotten Realms. They all met in the town of Daggerford, which is on the Sword Coast. Alis is not from Barovia, so he doesn't know all the locations in Barovia. He doesn't know all the NPCs. His information regarding Barovia is limited, but it's not zero. He knows what Barovia is. He knows who Count Strahd von Zarevich is. He understands some of the significance of these things and what that kind of allows me to do. And as I brief aside, we briefly also mentioned the concept of co-DMing in episode 1, and you mentioned that you first heard about it on a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel, I think you said, we looked it up afterwards. It was a WebDM, which is a great YouTube D&D YouTube channel if anyone's interested in checking them out.
For what it's worth, I actually was getting into the podcast form through iTunes, but yeah, I believe they're also available through YouTube.
Okay, see, I've only consumed WebDM through YouTube. I didn't even know they had a podcast. Good to know.
So many options.
So many options. We live in an era of multimedia. We kind of discussed, Josh helping me out as a co-DM. I have not DM'd for a very long time. This is the first time I have DM'd in a number of years, and Josh, who most recently DM'd a campaign for pretty much the same group, which I was a player in, we discussed him helping me out. But what we ended up working out was you're not a full-on co-DM. I haven't provided you with these story bullets. You're not leading the party by the nose, but what Alis is allowing you to do is to fill in some of the information and lore that, might otherwise go untouched. The rest of the group is not intimately familiar with the Ravenloft campaign setting lore. It's not just that their characters don't know it, because, the characters, that's natural, but the players don't know, so they may not know, what to investigate, what questions to ask. And Alis, who has a bit of information, just kind of a little, can follow the breadcrumbs better. And I think that's a really interesting way to help you tell, the story.
And so, to that end, actually, I still kind of consider it a type of code DMing. I guess it's more of a semantics point. Perhaps we need to come up with a new word for it, like executive player, secret DM, player with the carrot at the end of the stick, or something.
Secret DM.
It is an active arrangement between the player where we get to guide the story a little more. I don't want to say effectively, because I think that's a discredit to you, but gives some extra tools to both the DM in moving the story in a logical way, while also giving more tools to the players at the same time by being able to have that kind of undergirding that extra context to the campaign setting.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess you're right. We can argue about the semantics of what constitutes a DM, a co-DM. You're right. You're not that too dissimilar from a co-DM. The reason why I was hesitant to use that term is because I don't want it to sound like there is a second secret DM. Secret DM. That's an alternate name you post for it. That's kind of leading the rest of the group by the nose and kind of telling them go here, do this, because it is so important that the players keep their agency, and that the players get to do what they want in the world that you've prepared for them. And I didn't want it to seem like, oh, Alis is here to tell them what to do, because he's not. Josh is privy to a little bit more information than the rest of the group. He's privy to the information in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the source book, which is a tremendous source book, by the way. If any dungeon master is considering running the Curse of Strahd campaign, I highly recommend you get Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Or if you just want to do a horror-themed campaign in general, it's a great book.
I guess to perhaps clarify some of the language, I want to agree with you 100%, and kind of note that when we talk about guiding the players, sometimes that guidance isn't literally in the form of, okay, we need the players to go here and go there. And it also takes on an extra level because indeed we are playing a campaign module. There is there is a set narrative. There is a clear point where if you just go so far off the module that you play Baldur's Gate, for example, murder in Baldur's Gate, or if we're in Ravenloft and our premise is entirely we're just like, I actually do not want to go after Strahd von Zarovich. I do not actually want to be in Baldur's Gate anymore. Well, you're not playing the module anymore, and you're just homebrewing something. And so there is this sort of sandbox that you're in that you can still kind of tell when you're in it, when you're out of it, and that the idea of guidance sometimes comes in the form of giving clearer choices that just make it easier to then move the narrative. Having someone who knows the story to actually say, hey, I think we can go here, presents a clear, not necessarily a binary choice, but very visible, understandable choices. Is okay, we can go to here, and the players may choose to do that, versus they may say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do kind of the opposite of that or do something contrasting that. And just having that obvious choice versus, you put characters in the woods and say, all right, you're in the forest. What do you do? Well, sometimes then you don't necessarily know where to go, and even the players can feel a bit lost because they're not really sure what they're trying to do, don't have a clear goal.
Yeah, there's that kind of social contract that players have with the dungeon master that the dungeon master will lay out hooks for the players, and the social contract of D&D says the players will attempt to take them. And they may not take all of them. They only take some of them, and they may choose to take them in ways that the dungeon master doesn't expect. But the players, they're a part of this. They want to play the game, and the game is in the hooks that the DM lays out, and then it's up to the players to take them. What Alis is going to be really great doing is highlighting the hooks, and the players might not always realize what's important or significant, and Alis can say, because Alis has a little bit of knowledge in the world, it's not just because Josh has meta knowledge, Alis has knowledge and be able to highlight the fact that, oh, this seems important. We should talk about this more and see if maybe we want to do it. But it's not grabbing the rest of the party by the scruff of the neck and say, we're doing this because that is not how D&D really should be run, because that's railroading. Kind of moving on from that point, you'd met the group, you kind of joined up with them, and Alis took them back to the village of Barovia, which is where he had been staying for about a week, I believe, after getting dropped off by the carnival.
We could call it a 10-day. We could stay to the Forgotten Realms calendar. A 10-day is just really a better form of measurement than weeks that we use in the real world. I'm just saying.
I am using a campaign that is not set in Faerun. I am not using a 10-day. Everyone knows what weeks are. I don't think anyone in the group except for you and sometimes me knows what a 10-day is.
Societally, we could benefit. It's like a metric system for the calendar. I'm just saying.
Take it out with Pope Gregory or whoever instituted the Gregorian calendar. So, you lead them back to the village of Barovia, and, party just got out of the death house, a harrowing, always on edge place where they were in constant danger, and now they're in a town. And I'll be honest, village of Barovia, it sucks. It is ruined, it is run down, it is under constant assault by, undead zombies and wolves. The people mostly stay inside and indoors, but it's a town. It is the crappiest town imaginable, but it is a level of familiarity that they have not experienced since the party has entered Barovia. There is a tavern. They can go down and get some drinks and kind of reset, and it gives them a moment to breathe and exhale and say, okay, what do we do now? And it also is where the group meets their first first friendly NPC, one Ismark Kolyanovich, the son of the recently deceased burgomaster of the town, and he kind of starts the plot, if you will. He sits down and he talks to the players. He gives them a bit of information about Barovia, about the village, and about the land. And he just saw 6 armed and looking decently trained individuals walk into the town, and he has something that he needs done. So he spies these adventurers and says, "Okay, maybe I can get them to do it." And he asks them to help escort him and his sister Irina, to the town of Vallaki, which is the next town over, because she's in some kind of danger. And the party doesn't entirely know why or what she's in danger from, but Vallaki apparently has a proper town guard. There are walls. It is, as far as Ismark knows, safe there. And he wants to get Irina, his sister, to Vallaki, so the party now has a goal in the short term. And it's funny, one thing I was a little concerned about, Ismark in the module. This is a extremely poor town. Like, there is, most folks don't have 2 silver to rub together. And despite being the son of the burgomaster, he lives in a mansion in the most literal sense of the word. It's run down. It's falling apart. Has a little bit of money, but he probably doesn't have enough money to offer to kind of entice any mercenary values of the party. Well, I want you to do a job for me. Here's a bunch of gold I'll give you if you do it. He doesn't have that. So one thing I was concerned and was wondering how he would reconcile is, do I keep it that way? Do I make him beg upon the goodwill of the party? Do I just change it and have him magically have stacks of gold, which he really shouldn't have, considering how the terrible state of this village and even his own house? That was my big concern. How do I get the party to do it? And lo and behold, one of the party, Ravi, our gnome artificer, asked about an individual named Aragal, who, if you listen to episode 1, was mentioned in the prologue. The individual that kind of lured them into the mists. And it was kind of an interesting way out, because Aragal is a Vistani who lives out near Vallaki. And Ismark was able to say, well, yes, I think I've heard of this Aragal. He's over in Vallaki. There is a reason for the party to kind of a personal investment in the party doing this, other than just, good person do good thing, or here's a lot of cash.
Yeah, Ismark was a fun character to meet. Uh, if only because he contrasted as the first person in a while, in terms of the sessions, who was not trying to murder us or didn't have the threat of murdering us at the beginning. So he was really, in a way, our first actual friendly NPC who just started to contextualize the world that we're in, or the domain of dread that we were in. Indeed, I guess, as the best way you could say it is, indeed, it introduced the plot, set it up, and then gave us something to do after we got past the initial survive, or perhaps the rest of the party got past their initial survive, unlike my sorcerer.
Yeah, I should think it's worth mentioning. We also did have a 7th player who unfortunately could not stay long term with the campaign. So we mentioned Aegis dying. Technically, his halfling fighter, the 7th player, his halfling fighter, also just kind of vanished in the death house. He disappeared in the middle of the night, and no one ever saw him again. Technically, we do have 2 presumed deaths hanging over the party. So yeah, the party agrees to go to Vallaki with Ismark and his sister. He takes him back to the Burgomaster's manor to meet Irina, his sister. And if you've ever taken a creative writing course, like a 101 basic stuff type thing, one thing they really hammer down is show, don't tell. You want the reader, or in this case, the audience in general, in this case the audience is the players, to be able to see what's going on and understand it, instead of just holding up a big sign that says, here is a thing. And I really thought the introduction of Irina was a good place to showcase that, because they know that Irina's in danger. They know something's going on, but they don't know what. They don't know this woman. They don't really understand what danger means to her. This whole place seems pretty dangerous. Isn't everyone in danger? There are ghost houses and wolves attacking people. But when they get to the house is really like torn up. The outside, there's claw marks in it. The windows are all kind of boarded up, and the house is really, really battered. And when Ismark knocks on the door to get everyone inside, Irina undoes a bunch of locks. You hear a bunch of unlocking sounds, like a bunch of deadbolts and such. and she won't let the players in. She's like, Ismark, what the hell are you doing? You're deciding that we're just going to trust these people that you met at a bar. And she refuses to let them in until the party agrees to wash their hands with holy water to prove they're undead. Or sorry, to prove that they're not undead, rather. And I thought this was a great opportunity to kind of show this world's mindset. Ismark and Irina are people that live in this world. They've lived in Barovia for their whole lives. They understand how things work. So the process of, you know, refusing entry until the players can provide some proof of their being alive status, for lack of a better word, kind of gets you into the mindset of this is some of the measures that people in this uh, realm have to take because they don't know who they can trust. And I really think it was a good way to kind of get the party more into the mindset of what this kind of world was. I wonder if you had, Josh, did you have kind of any takeaways from the initial interaction with Irina?
I really liked the introduction of Irina because it did so much all at the same time. The idea being both, we had just been introduced to Ismark for a while, who's being presented to us as kind of the closest thing there is to nobility. And then you see his, home is this ramshackle place. And this again, leader of the village, is suddenly then being introduced to his, actually, is it older sister, younger sister, twin?
Younger. She is a few years younger.
Even better, is introduced by his younger sister, who immediately starts to dress him down for being far too careless and picking up strangers. And so, both doing that, you get to already see Ismark in another way as being almost like henpecked by his younger sister. And then it both also teaches you about Irina. You're immediately introduced to Irina as being this kind of authoritative, kind of assertive character, while at the same time as well getting a better understanding of a new fantasy setting. This idea where there is indeed the fear of undead. We have lots of fantasy settings, but not always this idea is, could someone be a vampire? What is a new potential spy? This is a new security measure being introduced through ambient storytelling. Hey, put your hands under this holy water. So much at the same time. I know I'm saying that a bunch, but really it's just all this packed into effectively 5 minutes of exposition and dialogue, and you're instantly getting the same.
Yeah, I thought it was a very effective scene, and I was very happy how that played out and how you guys responded to it. Another thing that she did was she wouldn't just let the party inside, and then Ismark said, "Okay, well this is all done. You can all come in now," and she kind of flipped on him, going back to the whole idea of vampires can't enter a home unless they've been invited in, and the fact that Ismark, they did the holy water, so they're probably fine, but Ismark, if there's had some way around it, back to Irina's very understandable paranoia, well, kind of the seal that keeps vampires out, Ismark, in his kind of his need to find somebody to help them, he just kind of undid that seal. And of course, we all know, I know, the players know that none of them are vampires, but Irina doesn't. And she was understandably very upset, but at that point, she's like, oh well, the seal has been broken. I guess there's no point in trying to prevent you coming in anymore. I have no choice now. I'm going to have to hopefully trust you.
It almost just makes me wonder, as a peripheral thought, like how serious, how is the manifestation of a formal allowing or a formal invitation to come into a building? Would it count if it was a hand gesture coming in? Does the vampire get to come in at that point? Is that in the stat block? Is that something we'd have to discuss? Just throwing that in there.
It is interesting. I mean, I'm not going to try to obfuscate what the D&D stat blocker vampire says. You own the monster manual. We just before Curse of Strahd, we just got off a campaign where you DM'd. It does mention that vampires they have a list of weaknesses. Running water, sunlight, etc. And one of them is called, they say, forbiddance. They can't enter a home unless they are invited inside. but that's all it says. It doesn't give specifics. And one of the great things about vampires in media is that there is kind of when people think vampires, they usually think of the kind of the classic Dracula depiction, but there really is no default vampire. Um, there's so many different iterations that do a bunch of very interesting things. Sometimes you got the kind of Twilight vampires that sparkle in the sun. You have Blade, the half vampire from the comic books who can function in the daylight. Anne Rice's depiction of vampires, where some of the rules exist, like sunlight, but a lot of them don't. If any of you have ever read or seen the movie Interview with a Vampire, one of the things they go right off the top, they list a bunch of things that aren't true, like they're not allergic to garlic, etc. So that's one of the most interesting things about vampires is that there's so many iterations and they all have different rules. That's why they're so ubiquitous. But the D&D vampire seems to be a very kind of the classic Dracula rules, but it is open to interpretation. You ask me, what does the forbidden, like what counts as inviting a vampire in? That's something that I need to decide as a dungeon master, because there is no set rules that are put in front of me that the monster manual tells me to follow. That's a DM's ruling kind of thing. We talk about DM's ruling in like mechanics and skill checks and combat, but that's a DM's ruling in storytelling. I need to decide what counts as inviting a vampire in.
And so, to anyone who kind of thought having a campaign module meant the story is taken care of for you, just a lot of it can be taken care of. You have a framework, but there is still just so many times where you have to make an executive decision, like characterizing a new player character, or sorry, non-player character NPC, or at that point, how does a monster or villain manifest their abilities and issues?
Absolutely, it's a lot of fun. I take a lot of pride in figuring this stuff out and adding and changing things that I feel need to be added and changed. But it is work, and it depends on how ambitious you are, I guess. I'm not saying that you can't just run modules like Curse of Strahd right in the book. You absolutely can, but I think the experience improves the more work you put into it, and I really think that's really true of storytelling in general. It's not just D&D. The more work the author puts into it, the better the product will be. So, kind of following that, the party comes inside and they learn that the recently deceased burgomaster is Mark and Irina's father. He died 3 days ago of a heart attack. He is just sitting in the house in a coffin, kind of as a kind of a prove yourself message to the party. They asked, okay, can you see if you can take us somewhere? So the party took the body of the burgomaster along with his Mark and Irina to the church so he could be buried, because Irina's been stuck at home the entire time because she's been scared of whatever it is that's going on with her. Hasn't quite been revealed that. We'll get to that in a bit. And Ismark, it is a casket with a man in it, and Ismark really can't lug it all the way to the other side of town to the church by himself. So the party is escorting the body and Ismark and Irina to the church. They get there, they meet the local priest, Father Donovich. They go down into the crypts where Ismark and Irina give their father his death rites and all that. And while the party is kind of hanging around, waiting in the church, they hear kind of a scream from underground, or in the undercroft below the church. And they hear what is ostensibly Father Donovich's son, Doru, who is screaming about how hungry he is. And when the party inquires about it, Father Donovich says, "Oh, he's just sick. I will go tend to his food later. Don't worry about it." And this is kind of the first side hook, if you will. Uh, we talk about D&D is a game. It is a game and a method of storytelling, and being a game, it has a number of different avenues you can take. And I think side hooks or side quests, completely optional things, are still they're important. They help build the world more and let the players see what else is out there. Even if it's not directly related to the main plot, a lot of it is, indirectly related, or it helps convey the atmosphere. And this is the first time, I really get the opportunity to drop kind of a side hook. The party, and Alis, your monk in particular, really got hooked on the idea of there is this a young man screaming in the basement that he's hungry repeatedly and repeatedly. And I just wanted to, what was your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, that was a fun introduction to the priest and church and just kind of a new area. I we hear that this person screaming, as you say, how hungry they are, and get a response like, "Oh, he's just not feeling well." Like, well, it sounds like he's doing pretty fine. So that was both a moment for me and for the character, both being like, "Okay, what is this really about?" And not being quite an official side quest, no one says, go check this out, but immediately draws attention for investigation. And I will, completely admit I got onto kind of a one track mind where I am just determined to have a look at that son, at the priest's son, and see what this is about because it's suspicious. My character wants to get to the bottom of this. He thinks he has his own destiny now that he is back in Barovia, where he was, originally born, and kind of get rid of all the darkness associated with it.
Yeah, and I think we talked about laying out hooks for the players, and what Alice can help do is help highlight the hooks for the players to take, and then they can choose how they want, which hooks they want to take, and they can choose how they want to take them. But I think most of the party really kind of latched on to Dora because it's pretty in your face, if you will. It's kind of he's shouting the whole time when he first shouts while the priest is there, and he says, and the priest responds to him and says, "Oh, I'll feed you later." Well, he keeps shouting. I think a couple of you had a kind of a bit of a conversation with him through the floor, and it was really something that kind of caught the whole party, which I was glad about. That means it was effective. They became interested in this, and that's kind of what you really want when you're laying out hooks. You want the players to be interested in them, and you need to make the introduction of the hook interesting enough for them to want to grab it. And I think that scene worked really well. But before anyone could investigate that, the burial was finished, and you needed to take Irina and Ismark back to their home. And you headed out down south from the church in the direction of the burgomaster's mansion, and you encountered a individual in the town square who kind of confronted you. And this individual, he had pale, gaunt skin, he had the red eyes, he had the kind of oversized canines. It was very clear this was a vampiric figure of some kind. It's not a mystery. He's not trying to hide it. This is Barovia. The vampires here do not need to hide. He introduced himself as Escher, and he kind of taunted the party a bit. And then he referred to Irina as Strahd's bride. And that was, again, the idea of, showing, not telling. No one has told us what is up with Irina, but now Escher has kind of shown up and confronted her a little bit. And that gets the party interested in asking, well, what the hell does he mean by Strahd's bride? And then he kind of left and sicked some wolves and some zombies on you. And what was your impression of Escher?
Yeah, Asher struck me, whereas in the same way, Ismark is a first NPC, first actual story character. Escher was this manifestation of the first meaningful villain. Struck me as the first lieutenant, if you will. It's not a surprise in a campaign module being called Curse of Strahd that, oh, one would assume the primary plot is around this Strahd guy. So the first person to act on behalf of him seems to be a rather important figure. And he was interesting, he was charming, he wasn't that standard henchman thug who sounds really dumb. He was interestingly polite, fitting a bit of that classic vampire archetype. And I'm a little bit curious on your end. Was this event planned? And indeed, did you find that you needed to give extra characterization to Escher that wasn't listed in the book, or did they give you pretty good hints on introducing Escher?
That's a very good question because the Curse of Strahd module is great. It is fantastic right out of the book, but it does have a few weaknesses, and one of the weaknesses are that Strahd's henchmen, his inner circle, if you will, with really only one, maybe like one and a half exceptions, isn't very fleshed out. His chief vampire lieutenants in the book are just vampire spawn, and they get like two personality traits, or rather, they get two sentences about their personality traits. Rather, there's not much there. And one thing I really wanted to do when, you know, adding to this story was to build up the henchmen. Escher is not in the village of Barovia in the campaign module. He doesn't show up at all. He doesn't taunt the party. He doesn't have any missions. You can encounter him later, and when you do encounter him, he doesn't really do much. So I wanted to build up Strahd's inner circle, and the first of his inner circle that you've met is this Escher fellow. He's kind of, lower on the pecking order, if you will. That's why he is it's the beginning of the story. You face the weaker henchman first, but that's a meta narrative thing. But I really thought it was important to meet a antagonistic figure that wasn't just some creepy ghost children sooner. So I thought, I kind of had my list of all his inner circle. Who would be the best one to put in the village of Barovia? And I felt Escher, this kind of high class noble type figure who, he is still taunting the party, but he speaks in complete sentences. He bows. He's well dressed. It was kind of the perfect introduction because it gave you a look into what these people are like. It's that very classic Dracula style vampire of they are nobility, they dress well, they speak well. If it weren't for the red eyes if it weren't for the red eyes and the gaunt skin and the vampiric features, you might think them they were just some upper class individual. Of course, the vampiric traits kind of give that away real fast, but I really thought that was kind of an important way to give the party a glimpse into the kind of the psyche of these individuals. And also, I should mention, he bids Irina to come to be with Strahd, but he doesn't snatch her. He could have tried. I don't know whether that would or wouldn't have worked. Probably depended on the party's actions. But he doesn't snatch her. And despite Irina being in the village of Barovia for her entire life, she hasn't been snatched. And that kind of tells the party that whatever Strahd wants with her, he's not interested in snatching her. The wolves and zombies that are sick in the party don't attack her. They attack the rest of the party. They attack Ismark. They don't attack her because Strahd doesn't want her harmed, and even though Strahd could just grab her, he doesn't because he wants her to come to him. And I think that whole sequence kind of gives the party a glimpse into what the antagonist and his inner circle are like, what he is trying to do, at least regarding Irina. So you did wrap up that battle. It was pretty easy. I was hoping the zombies would last a bit longer, but I think only because the zombies are slow, they didn't get up to you very quickly. You kind of dispatched them. I think only one of them actually managed to land a hit the entire fight. So you dispatched the zombies, you dispatched the wolves. Escher had just left. It's kind of a, hi, I'm taunting you, here, deal with my minions. And you get back to the house, and now the party has an opportunity to kind of ask, okay, what the hell is up with Irina? It's kind of a little bit of a Q&A time. What does he mean by Strahd's bride? And that's kind of, exposition dumps are always a difficult thing in any kind of storytelling. You don't want to overdo it. It can get awkward. You want to show, not tell. But if you give the party the right information, like Escher calling Irina the bride of Strahd, it'll prompt the characters to ask the right questions. And so Irina doesn't just suddenly vomit out the information about her backstory and what the potential connection with Strahd is. They ask her, and she organically is able to tell them. And I think that is really the great way that you want to do exposition in D&D. You want to plant the questions in the players' minds and then let the players ask the questions that they want to ask.
It's obviously not an introduction of Irina because we'd already met her, but that was a sufficiently subtle hint that more is going on with Irina and contextualizes a bit more of her plot of why is she so paranoid? Oh, the title character, the title villain seems to be after her. So can't it almost No, actually, I would even say it doesn't almost. It genuinely begs the question: what is this about?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's very natural. And of course, the players, without really much prompting, did ask about it, and they found out that Strahd somehow, for some reason, believes that she is the reincarnation of his long lost love, a woman by the name of Tatiana, a woman whose name you heard in the Death House. For people familiar with the Strahd lore, will probably note that that doesn't seem right. That is one addition I made, uh, or alteration, I guess it's less than an addition, more of an alteration. Tatiana was one of the daughters of the family in the Death House. I just kind of put that in there as kind of a moment of foreshadowing earlier, like so that when the name Tatiana comes up, it's not just kind of a name out of the ether. The players, they don't know much about Tatiana, but they have heard the name before, and it kind of lands truer with them, which makes it more interesting, I think. So Irina kind of finishes giving you her sob story. Um, and then sob story. It's a terrible way to put it. She finishes giving them her backstory, and the party decides, okay, we're leaving in the morning. We're going to take you to Valaki. We need to get supplies for this, and Ismark needs supplies himself, so y'all head off to Bildrath's Mercantile, the only general store in town. Josh, what did you think of Bildrath's Mercantile? It was a bit of an interesting time.
I had far more fun with Bildreth than I probably should have. I don't know how much time you spent on him, but literally giving us this merchant who regularly clarifies that he has the only shop in town was very, very amusing to me, and an obvious justification for his high prices and the fact that he would not negotiate anything. And I don't know if it comes to having been previously studying communications to be professionally involved in media production, but was almost baffled by my fellow players attempting to haggle at increasing lengths of like, well, surely the price could go down. Like, well, you see, it is the only shop in town, so you can go elsewhere, but that would involve leaving the next town over. And I do like the fact that you simply did not entertain any persuasion checks for haggling. He simply responded no each time.
Yeah, because Bildrath is, I kind of embellished him a little bit, but I kind of took him right out of the module. It says right in the book, he is the only game in town. Uh, he has no competition. He owns a monopoly, if you will, and his prices, it's a kind of the typical general store thing, the average general store in D&D games. They have anything in the equipment list that's under 25 gold pieces, and that's exactly what Bildrath had, except it's all marked up 10 times. So something that would cost 1 gold piece costs 10 gold pieces. Something that would cost 10 gold pieces cost 100, and kind of the reverse was true for anything he bought. And the rest of the party did offload some gemstones and valuables they got in the death house, and he gave them 1/10 of the price, and a few of them took it, which I was highly amused by.
The prices, I think, were, in terms of purchasing at least, easier to obviously scoff at because it became a matter of like, oh, I will have next to no money left, or I genuinely can't afford that. In a way that selling an item, a lot of the items we had, were just finding as inventory drops. Even if you're using the player's handbook, it's not going to show you the base price for a lot of these items. And even if it was something in the player's handbook, it's not something that often is committed to memory for something so generic that I think it's easier to kind of go like, all right, well, this is more money than I had. I don't really know if how much, if I am being shortchanged at all, other than just the fact I know this guy charges high prices. Maybe he's doing the same thing. Well, forget it. Money is how I was imagining that at least.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I was still highly amused. But one thing I do want to talk about is I thought that was a great scene. It was a great role playing scene. We got some good characterization by the players with this kind of a colorful shopkeeper. Barovia is a dangerous and stressful place. This is a dangerous and stressful campaign. And, I talked about earlier that when the party got into the village of Barovia, it gave them a moment to breathe. But it was only a short breath. They go to the bar or the tavern. Ismark asks them, "Hey, help us out." They go up to the church. They come back, and then they're suddenly in combat in the middle of the town. One of Strahd's agents is on them. They've been in town a minute, and one of Strahd's agents is on them when they're on their way back from the church. So, they're like, okay, I can breathe, but still everything's not right here. Bad things are still happening. We're in a town, but we are not suddenly safe because we are in a town. Buildraths was a really good opportunity to let everyone relax for a bit. I think we were like the role play. We were in there for like 30 minutes, maybe even 40 minutes of real time, and you know it really let everyone kind of let loose a bit, and it was like, okay, you're in Buildrath Mercantile. The plot isn't going to happen while you're in the shop. Nothing's going to happen to you while you're in the shop. You can just kind of exhale, breathe a bit, have a fun interaction with this very colorful character, and you can just say, okay, we're okay for a minute. We can reset and start to figure things out. And I think that's the value of mundane role playing, especially in a campaign that is as high stress as Curse of Strahd. And I know there are other really high stress modules out there, so this is applicable to them as well. If you're doing Tomb of Annihilation or Descent into Avernus.
Actually, something you mentioned, indeed, I think the role playing of this event was quite good. And in fact, I wanted to ask kind of your opinion on an event that took place there, and that was the first time for the Strahd campaign. And I will openly admit I took this as a page from you in the Waterdeep campaign we're doing together with some other friends, not part of a podcast, unfortunately, but maybe someday, where you went with the idea of a bit of private role playing. I pulled aside Mortis to talk to him while the kind of sales were taking place. And in that, Aelis spent some time actually talking to Mortis about his background and if anything had happened to him recently, because indeed the idea Aelis is originally, could trace his backgrounds to the Forgotten Realms or main campaign setting that the prologue starts in, and wants to know more about him. And I know actually I did tell you this is. You asked, should I be part of this private roleplay? Should I switch Discord channels to manage this? And I told you, no, that's not really necessary. I'm curious if you had thoughts about that. Did you feel uncomfortable about that? Because I know we did actually do that at another event in the campaign, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point. And you actually did then sit in on the next one.
Yeah, I would say part of it is that I have extended trust and experience with you. I'm not sure if I would be comfortable with everyone doing it. It probably depends who the group is. Like, you did DM our last session with this kind of, we're not deciding, we're not sure if we're calling it co-DMing or not, but it's kind of, this kind of plan we've put forward with Aelis. You have helped. I've bounced a lot of ideas off of you, so I do have a level of comfort with you. I guess you guys were just. I knew that you guys were just kind of talking about character stuff, doing a little bit of character to character RP, and there wasn't really a lot of, you weren't gonna do anything, I guess. So I guess that's why I was fine with it. It's kind of
Josh breaks the game first chance he gets.
Yeah, secretly you go and kill Buildrath while you're in the other channel. So I guess I'm not entirely sure to answer that. It'd probably be a case by case basis, whether or not I'm comfortable with it or not. It'd probably depend on what I think you're doing.
And so I guess I want to press on that one a little bit. When you say that, based on what we're doing, do you find that just in general the idea of pulling aside players and you not being there, or the fact that sometimes players the trying to facilitate one part of the group having conversation with the others? Because indeed, when I was running Exiles of the Coast, that didn't really ever happen during the game session. if there was ever private conversation, it was always between me and one of you all, or a couple of you, never something separate. So that was something we didn't do really at all beforehand.
Because we are playing online, we are using Roll20, and we are using voice chat in Discord because we're a group that's kind of all over the place. We can't really get together and play in person. Um, Having to jump between different Discord channels is would be kind of tricky and difficult. And the rest of the group was kind of in a kind of having a good role play moment with Bildreth, and you were just pulling a Mortis aside just to talk, not to do anything, just to talk. So it's like, I'm fine with that. I don't need to be there. The rest of the group is interacting with an NPC. I need to be here to play the NPC. You guys can do your own thing. So yeah, it really kind of brings it back to, do I feel I need to be there or not? It really is case by case. It's depending. Are you doing anything? What are the characters doing anything other than just talking? Is there an NPC interaction? Because if there's an NPC interaction, I obviously have to be there. And also, is the rest of the group doing something? Can I tell the rest of the group to kind of, okay, take 5, I'll go deal with this. So yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer, but it's something that you got to consider and think about when you're playing virtually, and you got to kind of bounce around using technology.
That's true. Although I would say to another extent, even in person, it is already just something you have to monitor whether or not indeed do. If someone wanted to, you're in person and two players say, "I'm going to have a private conversation," and then what? Do they actually? They can't. You can't literally have two separate conversations going on at the same time. At least not at both of the normal volume without having trouble hearing another person. And so at that point, what other players then walk to the other room, you're still dealing with a similar dynamic. And to that, you would still say, though, right, that it's just unclear whether or not that adds to something. It's just going to be definitively case by case. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So you guys did wrap up in Buildraths, and you headed outside, and Ismark decided that, okay, I've got the stuff I need for the trip. I'm going to head back for the mansion. You guys should come soon because night is falling soon, and I mentioned that you had about 30 minutes of daylight left, and I know we'll get into this discussion because there is a bit of a debate about how fast night was falling.
Allegedly
But
stated that there were 30 minutes, but okay.
okay. Um, but Alis wanted to go check out go to investigate Doru, check out the priest's son, see what's going on with him, because it's again that hook earlier that most of the party hooked onto. Um, and one thing I should probably mention, it was mentioned previously, both with Father when they were with Father Donovich in the church earlier, and also through interaction with Ismark and Irina, that you know bad things happen at night in the village of Barovia. It's not too difficult to surmise what those bad things are. A lot of the houses are in ruins. There's claw marks, and on the burgomaster's mansion, windows are boarded up. Non-boarded up windows in other houses are smashed in. Some bad stuff happens here at night. Something attacks. Surprise, surprise! It's zombies. Spoiler alert. Ismark was urging you. Well, if you're gonna run an errand, and you didn't tell Ismark what you were doing. Well, if you're gonna run an errand, make sure it's quick because you don't want to be here when night falls. But you kind of wrangled up the rest of the party, except for our wizard Regina, who didn't feel motivated enough in character to go and head off and do this thing because Regina's, not so much interested in doing good for good's sake. So she headed off back to the burgomaster's mansion and enjoys a nice stew dinner, while the rest of you headed back to the church. And well, maybe I should let you take the lead on this one. What happened when you got to the church, Josh?
Yeah, so that, and perhaps I need to credit this to being this is the first campaign where I got to be a player after effectively 2 years of straight DMing, that the lack of direct control at least stuck a lot harder where I'm like, oh my god, I'm hurting cats. Oh my god, this is excruciating. Because it felt like I had a very clear vision of like, okay, I've earlier in the session, early in this recording, we're saying, I there is someone screaming in the basement, and I need to get to the bottom of this. And it just sounds really simple in my head, where it's like, okay, we drop off these NPCs, we get through this, and then we sneak in, we find out what this is about. Perhaps we kill, eliminate our target, and then get right out. But when we get there, feels like it's going a bit smoothly. I'm already getting a little frustrated of like, okay, we got to deal with this NPC. All right, we talked to Bildreth. All right, we talked to Ismark some more at his home. Oh my God, we're having dinner. Oh, okay, we're finally here. The door's locked. Okay, we get the rogue to pick the lock, and then we just had this protracted conversation about how do we enter into the building of like, okay, do we all stealth in? Do some of us stealth in? Um, and there's just that moment of like, indeed, this is a Discord channel. This is a bunch of people all talking kind of at the same time with how this is going to manifest. Uh, Ultimately, what happens is a bunch of us sneak, one of us, or maybe a couple of us, I don't care, or don't really remember, doesn't matter, have a few poor rolls on their stealth going in, and Father Donovich hears this noise as we literally walk into the church, and I'm like, we're looking at the map. I cannot stress enough how much this like drove me up the wall. It is 10 feet of diagonal movement. The door is clearly visible. I just can't imagine this, in real life, sort of someone tripping on the doormat and then slamming their head in while wearing a suit of mail. Like, how this happened, but it did. Father Donovich comes out, and already the stealth pan collapses almost the moment that it started. And Alis finds himself forced to, instead of sneaking in, knock out Father Donovich before we can even get into the basement. If anything, obviously more happens, but I want to hear your read on this before we continue further.
It was we talk about that we're playing online. There was a little bit of an issue of just using Roll20 and the technology. Players in our group don't always move their tokens when they say they're going to move their tokens. People say we're heading inside, but then they don't always head inside. So I'm like, well, are you heading inside? Are you not? And at first, also the cleric Bobby first said that no, I'm not going to stealth. I'm just going to walk in. So you guys kind of had to talk him down from clunking in behind you. He's wearing chainmail. He's already got a low dex score. He's got a -1 to dex, and he's got disadvantage on stealth checks because of his armor. So it's clunk, 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 clunk. But you had to talk him down from that. There was this building frustration that kind of came to a head where finally, okay, you and Mortis were sneaking in. You both have good stealth scores, but you rolled poorly on your stealth check. And you made some noise. Father Donovich, who is pretty close to the door, his study is just one door down from the main entrance. He comes out, this heavy set priest, comes out with his club like, what's there? What's going on? And then I'm curious, did you knock him out of frustration? Did you knock him out because you kind of panicked, either in character or out of character, or was it more calculated than that?
Yeah, so as far as that particular incident went, that was not any. I guess there may have been a brief moment of panic, but I wouldn't say that it was actually an influencing factor. There was like, oh God, this something bad is happening. But ultimately, I already knew what I wanted to do the moment that happened. I already knew how the character should have handled that. Was the idea is like, I'm not trying to kill a priest. I'm trying to do the stealthy and going in and out. The next best thing, because I cannot do this completely unseen, is to just render someone unconscious. I'm not going to be able to talk my way out of this. This is the only obvious way to proceed.
That makes sense. So you assaulted the priest, this little fat man. He's got the priest stat block, which is technically better than the commoner stat block, meaning he's got like 14 wisdom and like 9 HP, but you literally took him out in like one hit, I think.
Two hits. It was the action and then the bonus action hit.
Yeah. And I think at some point along this way, I did give you a. You think you got about 15 minutes of daylight left, and I guess we probably should talk about that before we get ahead. We had a bit of a disagreement on how much time we felt should be passing because I did explicitly say that it takes about 5 minutes to get from Bildras Mercantile to the church, and I did say you have about 30 minutes of daylight left when you left Bildras Mercantile. I believe I gave you a 15-minute warning as well, but I did 100%. I gave you a 30-minute warning. But one thing I probably should have done better was I should have been more descriptive about the fading light, and I do acknowledge that. Instead of just saying, "Oh, okay, you got a magical clock in your head that tells you how long till nightfall," because you don't, but you see the sun setting. I probably should have done that, but or rather, I should have not done that. I should have uh, been more descriptive about the light is fading. It's night is happening soon, as opposed to you see the last glimpses of sun over the horizon, and we can debate whether or not as much time passed as it should have, but I definitely could have handled that better, and I do think there were kind of complaints is too strong of a word, but there were a couple of you guys took a little bit of issue with that, and that is something I do need to do better in the future.
And so I don't feel like ending the podcast on episode 2 because we have a violent dispute over how many times, if any, we used exact qualifiers of how many minutes were left. I will state I do know you mentioned there was 15 minutes of travel time to the church. I do not
There's 15
have
minutes of travel time. There's 15 minutes of travel time from the Burgermaster's house to the church. There was 5 minutes of travel time from Bildras to the church.
already wondering if we'll be able to get to episode 3. Just in that said, I do not
Put him up.
directly
Put him up.
I do not directly recall the 30 minutes or 15 minutes of daylight. Maybe I didn't hear it, maybe it passed in the head. Does not matter substantively at this point. I would kind of add to this because we have circled about this conversation, both pre-recording and just post-session and the like. Indeed, I do think though, because I think you have admitted before there was multiple uses of subjective or relative terminology over time passage, over like it's getting dark soon, and not even for the point that the purpose of this being discussed on the podcast is not for us to have a public forum, for us to debate, but indeed the idea of ways that the story, clarifying ways storytelling can happen, and indeed those disconnects that can happen between the dungeon master and the player, and indeed just communications in general. The idea of soon felt very obvious to you because you had your own idea of when is this going to happen. You've got your own internal tracker, and we as players are still just being introduced to the world. Obviously, my character is supposed to be, from Ravenloft, but indeed the way darkness travels isn't going to be as relevant to him. And the fact is, even story-wise, we just haven't talked about that, of how quickly time passes. So when that moment, like soon can indeed be an hour, relatively speaking, soon can also be 60 seconds. So I think that like the fact was us as players, we didn't do a poll, of course. This was just something I talked about with the rogue at the time. It was like it felt like it moved fast, and the fact was, we had not had given an internalized perception of time in this campaign. And so we did then discuss, and you alluded to the idea, more external descriptions, visual descriptions may be a way of doing that. And that is perhaps something everyone should consider when they are describing something, or indeed using relative terms in their campaign.
Yeah, for sure. One of the kind of the big hurdles when you're telling a story in Dungeons and Dragons is you have the thought of what's going on in your head, but because so much of the game happens in your head, you use your imagination. You might think what's going on in your head is everyone else is getting the same impression in what they're thinking and what their idea of what's going on is, but it's not. And that's why I think you know, being better with descriptions is something that can really help everyone get into the same headspace instead of just, instead of just dropping, get specific terms versus, non-specific terms. I think really helps the group kind of stay cohesive and in kind of the same mindset. But with that vicious argument now finally settled once and for all time, you do manage to break into the Undercroft and meet the priest's son, Doru, who very clearly he doesn't look anything like Escher. He's in rags, he's in tatters, his hair is wild. He speaks with a kind of a lower class accent, but it is very clear he's got that gaunt skin, those pronounced canines, those red eyes, and he is a vampire spawn very clearly. And he is, when the party arrives, he doesn't attack them. In fact, he cowers in the corner because he explains to you that he is starving. He's a vampire spawn. He's craving blood, but he also recognizes 5 armed adventurers in the room with them. He's emaciated. He has not been eating well. I gave him in a stat block because he's weakened. I gave him half his HP, and I think I reduced his strength score by 2. He knows that if he fights you, he will probably lose and die, and he doesn't want to die, but he's also so hungry that his thirst might overtake him, and he's this real kind of pathetic individual.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was one of the more interesting parts of that encounter because indeed we play so much with the vampire archetype of being these very high class characters, these people that are often well dressed or high status. And I think that also reflected that is just a cultural expectation in the game. In Ravenloft, and a lot of vampires in general. So, my character Alis is very much surprised by this. This is not what Alis is expecting, as he is trying to purge all undead or darkness from Barovia. This is not what he wanted at all, and it felt like an obvious moment of character conflict. And I thought that was actually just a fun kind of role playing moment to utilize other players' opinions. I use that moment for Alis to run up the stairs and kind of ask himself, "What am I doing? I'm trying to fight villains and undead. This begging child or this begging person." And we did have the group debate that for a bit. And how did you feel that? Did you have an idea of how you expected this to go down and how that played out?
I was hoping that some of you would kind of give a bit of pause to just immediately see monster kill monster, and I think you did. I think some of the other players also had similar responses, but eventually you did determine that this creature is an undead. He confesses that his father has been bringing him bodies for him to eat. Whether Father Donovich is bringing him dead people, or Father Donovich is potentially using his status as a priest to murder people to bring his son food. He is clearly despite his wretched status, he's clearly a danger and a threat to the town. So you all decided to go down and kill him. And I should note, kind of as a side note here, that this is when you were having this conversation about what to do. Night had fallen at this point, but Ismark told you to finish up your errands and get back for nightfall. This was not happening at this point, but you all resolved to go and slay Doru, slay this monster that is more wretched than monstrous, but is a threat to the town. And I think perhaps that is a good place to leave off, kind of heading into, kind of stealing your resolve and heading into a fight with this poor, wretched, but still extremely dangerous creature.
Some wacky stuff happened after that, so stay
It's,
tuned,
it's,
I guess.
yeah, it was quite a time, I'll say that. But we want to thank you so much for listening. We had a lot of fun making this podcast. We hope that you had a lot of fun listening to it. Until next time, take care and goodbye.
Steps off, wait.